So when you think about a conversation, it usually just feels like something that kind of just happens to you. Like you run into someone in the hallway, words fall out of your mouth, and you just hope the whole thing goes smoothly.
Right, you're just winging it.
Totally. But imagine for a second that every time you start talking to someone, you are actually playing this high stakes game of chicken. It's like two cars hurtling toward each other, and you both have to make these independent split-second decisions without knowing what the other person is going to do.
Yeah.
Like, do I veer left into a serious topic? Do they veer right into a joke? Are we about to just, crash into total awkwardness? Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today we are looking at a really fascinating business school course on the science of communication to help you become a master conversationalist.
Which is such an important mission, honestly, because it really is a relentless coordination problem. From the exact moment you make eye contact, your brain is just frantically trying to calibrate.
Yeah, like what are we even doing here?
Right. What are we talking about? What's the tone? How much am I supposed to share right now? And you are forced to make these calculations continuously, on the fly, with incomplete information about the other person's state of mind.
Which you do, what, 100 times a day?
Easily. And mastering that conversational game of chicken is basically the ultimate cheat code. Because if you really zoom out and look at the architecture of your life, every relationship you have is just a repeated sequence of conversations over time.
That is such a good way to frame it.
Yeah, like a friendship, a marriage, a career, they aren't these static, monolithic things. They are literally just a series of interactions. So if you can understand the mechanics of those interactions and improve them even slightly, the compounding effect on your entire life is massive.
And the sources we're diving into today actually crack the code on this whole coordination problem. They distilled it into this really practical four-part framework known as TALK. That's T-A-L-K. Topics: asking, levity, and kindness.
It's a brilliant framework, very accessible.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of fixing our awkward moments, we kind of have to address the elephant in the room. Like, why is something so fundamental to our species so incredibly difficult for us to actually do?
Well, it all boils down to human nature, and specifically our hardwired egocentrism.
Ouch.
I know it sounds harsh, but we have to recognize that our default setting, biologically speaking, is to be entirely focused on ourselves.
Which, yeah, sounds like a massive character flaw when you just say it out loud like that.
It does, but it's actually an evolutionary survival mechanism. Your brain is this calorie-burning machine, and its primary job is to keep you alive. To do that efficiently, it has to prioritize your perspective above literally everything else.
Right. Like, am I safe?
Exactly. What are my threats? What do I need right now? How am I being perceived by the pack?
Yeah.
That intense self-focus was brilliant for avoiding predators on the savannah. But in a modern social setting, it completely blocks our ability to take someone else's perspective.
Our ego just gets in the way before we even open our mouths.
Precisely.
And that evolutionary blind spot actually explains this wild statistic from the source material. So think about the last time you, the listener, prepped for a first date or a major networking event. You probably spent like an hour picking out the right outfit.
Oh, definitely. Checking the mirror 10 times.
Right. Grooming, mapping out the route to the restaurant so you aren't late, maybe even reviewing the guest list. But the data shows that only about 10% of people spend any time thinking about what they are actually going to talk about once they get there.
It's wild. We obsess over the environment and the aesthetics, but we completely neglect the interaction itself. And that brings us perfectly to the first pillar of the framework, which is the T in topics.
Topics, okay.
Yeah. We have to actively override that egocentric default by preparing what we want to discuss, like packing a mental suitcase.
Okay, I hear that, but honestly, the idea of prepping a literal topic list for a date or a casual dinner party sounds incredibly robotic to me.
You're not alone in thinking that.
Like, if I'm sitting across from someone, mentally scrolling through my little clipboard of approved talking points, I feel like I'm going to completely lose any natural chemistry. It feels like forced spontaneity,
That is the most common hesitation by far. But the research shows the exact opposite outcome. Prepping topics doesn't ruin spontaneity. It actually creates the psychological safety required for spontaneity to happen in the first place.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Think of it like priming a pump. If the conversation runs dry, you don't have to wait in total panic for inspiration to strike, because you already have water in the pipes.
Oh, I see. So it's less of a rigid script and more of a safety net.
Exactly. And for introverts, or just anyone who suffers from social anxiety, this is a total game changer. Studies show that spending just 30 seconds, literally half a minute, brainstorming possible topics before entering a room makes the resulting conversation significantly more fluent.
And less terrifying, I imagine.
Way less. You don't even have to use the topics you brainstormed. Just knowing they are in your back pocket dramatically lowers your cortisol levels. So when a lull happens, your brain doesn't instantly jump to a fight or flight response.
And the sources shared a really clever hack for doing this if you are, like, completely drawing a blank. You can actually outsource the brainstorming to AI.
Yes, I loved this part.
Let's say you're visiting relatives you haven't seen in a decade, and you have no idea what their day-to-day life is like now. You can literally type into a chatbot, what are good conversation topics for a couple in their 70s living in upstate New York who recently retired and have 9 grandchildren?
It is remarkably effective because the AI is essentially aggregating the statistical trends and common life experiences of that specific demographic.
Right, it gives you a starting point.
Exactly. You instantly get tailored, relevant questions that show you are actually considering their specific stage in life rather than just defaulting to generic small talk about the weather.
Well, speaking of small talk, the research actually categorizes topics into this hierarchy. They call it a topic pyramid. And I was super surprised to see that they don't demonize small talk at all.
No, they don't. At the very bottom of the pyramid is small talk. The weather, the commute, the food. Everyone loves to complain about small talk.
Oh, yeah. I hate small talk. I only want deep conversations.
Right. But it serves a crucial anthropological function. It is a low-stakes search for common ground. It's the pregame warm-up that signals, I am friendly and I'm willing to interact with you. You just don't want to get stuck there.
Right. You use it as a bridge to the middle tier, which they call tailored talk.
Exactly. Tailored talk is where you deploy those prep topics and ask more personalized, open-ended questions. A fantastic example from the research is asking someone, what is something you are incredibly good at but you absolutely hate doing?
That is a phenomenal question. It immediately shifts the dynamic
It really does.
because you are acknowledging their competence, but you're inviting them to be a little bit vulnerable or maybe just humorous about their frustrations.
And that kind of question naturally propels you to the top of the pyramid, which is deep talk. These are those magical moments of genuine vulnerability and profound connection.
Which you obviously don't want to force with everyone.
Right. You aren't aiming for deep talk with the person ringing up your groceries.
Yeah.
But when you navigate from small talk up to deep talk with a friend or a colleague, that is where the relationship actually solidifies.
But here's where I see a potential pothole. You prime the pump, you have these tailored topics ready to go. How do you introduce them without sounding like an HR manager conducting an exit interview?
Yeah, the delivery is everything.
Like if I just sit down and say, hello, tell me what you are good at but hate doing, that is deeply off-putting. And I guess that brings us to the next phase of the framework, which is the A asking.
Right. How you deploy these topics matters immensely. Asking questions is framed as a literal superpower in this research because it solves one of the biggest mechanical problems in communication, which is cognitive load.
Let's break down cognitive load, because when we are just chatting with someone, it doesn't normally feel like we are doing heavy lifting.
Consciously, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But subconsciously. A conversation requires an immense amount of processing bandwidth.
Because there's so much going on under the surface.
Exactly. Your brain is analyzing their facial expressions, parsing their tone, recalling your own vocabulary, suppressing inappropriate thoughts.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. And trying to formulate a clever response, all in real time. It is completely exhausting. But the moment you ask a genuine question, you instantly transfer that heavy cognitive load onto the other person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you buy your brain a moment to rest. You don't have to be endlessly interesting, you know? You just have to be endlessly interested.
Which perfectly explains a phenomenon from the sources that I think everyone listening will instantly recognize. The ZQ.
Ah, yes, the zero questioner.
We have all been trapped in a conversation with the ZQ. You go on a date where you sit through an hour-long lunch meeting, and the other person talks the entire time without asking a single question about you.
It is incredibly frustrating. It leaves you feeling totally invisible. But the psychological mechanism behind the ZQ isn't always narcissism.
It's not, because it sure feels like it.
I know, but often they're just paralyzed by cognitive load. They're stuck in that egocentric survival mode, or they are terrified of asking something too intrusive. So their brain just defaults to the only topic it knows perfectly. which is themselves.
Okay, so we need to ask questions to balance the load, but asking is really only the first half of the equation, right? You actually have to process the answer. And the source material breaks down the mechanics of listening in a way that totally reframes the entire concept for me. Listening isn't just hearing.
Not at all. The researchers define listening as a strict three-step process. Step one is the physical act, hearing and seeing. So taking in the audio and the nonverbal body language.
Right, the basic biological part.
Yeah. Then step two is elaborating. This happens internally, where your brain connects what they're saying to what you already know, forming thoughts and opinions about their statement.
But if I stop at step 2, the other person has no idea I've actually done any of that internal work. I'm just staring at them silently.
Exactly. So there has to be an output phase to prove you processed it. Step three is showing. You have to actively get credit for listening.
The analogy they use for this is brilliant. It's exactly like taking a complex math test in school. You can do all the mental math in your head and write down the correct final answer, but what does the teacher always say?
Show your work.
Show your work. If you don't show the steps, nobody believes you actually solved it yourself. In conversation, having the right internal thought isn't enough. You have to show your conversational work.
The sources gave a great example of how this fails. Imagine a couple in the kitchen. One person is cooking, facing the stove, and the other person is talking to their back.
A classic scenario.
Right. And the person talking gets frustrated and says, "You aren't listening to me." The person cooking turns around and repeats the last sentence perfectly, word for word, to prove they were listening.
But they still fail the test. Because repeating data like a tape recorder isn't showing your work. They had the right answer, but turning their back violated the nonverbal rules of the interaction. So beyond just making eye contact and nodding, which anyone can fake, how do we authentically show our work?
You have to speak your listening. This is a concept linguists actually call grounding.
Yeah.
You use your words to summarize and validate what was just said.
Like saying, what I hear you saying is.
Exactly. You briefly paraphrase their core point.
Ugh.
Or you validate the emotion behind the words by saying it makes complete sense that you would feel overwhelmed by that timeline.
That's powerful.
It really is. Grounding ensures that your shared understanding is actually shared. When you do this, you signal to their brain that they are safe and understood, which builds massive trust.
Okay, so we are priming the pump with great topics, we are managing cognitive load by asking questions, and we are showing our work by grounding the conversation.
Right.
But the risk here, especially if you get into that top tier of deep talk, is that the conversation suddenly feels incredibly heavy. We don't want every interaction to feel like a high-stakes therapy session.
No, we definitely don't.
Yeah.
And that is why the third pillar is crucial, the L in talk, which is levity. We often misidentify the biggest threat to a conversation. We tend to think the silent killer is conflict, like people arguing or disagreeing.
Sure, because conflict feels bad.
Right. But human beings are actually quite good at staying engaged during a conflict. Adrenaline is pumping, you're focused. The actual silent killer of conversation is boredom.
Boredom. Because boredom is a signal to the brain that this interaction basically has no utility.
Exactly. When you are bored, your brain decides there is no social, emotional, or survival value in the exchange, and it prompts you to disengage. The moment either person internally disengages, the connection just severs.
So levity is the fix.
Yes. Levity, inserting moments of humor, warmth, playfulness, or even just a lighthearted observation, is the neurological antidote to boredom. It spikes dopamine and resets the attention span. And fascinatingly, levity ties directly into the academic concept of status.
Status is a tricky word because normally we associate status with wealth, job titles, or social class.
Yeah, the Rolex and the sports car.
Right. But the behavioral scientists here are using it differently.
They are. In the context of a conversation, status refers to your level of likability, respect, and influence within that specific group at that specific moment. And the most empowering realization from the research is that conversational status is highly dynamic. It is not a fixed trait.
Walk us through how that actually looks in a real-world scenario.
Sure. Imagine you are sitting in a cross-departmental meeting. The group is deep into a discussion about a complex software migration that you know absolutely nothing about.
I've been there.
We all have. In that specific window of time, your status is low. You might feel invisible or totally unqualified to speak. But 20 minutes later, the agenda shifts, and the topic becomes a community outreach initiative that you personally designed last year.
Oh, wow.
Right. In an instant, the hierarchy rearranges. You shoot to the top of the status ladder, you become the undisputed expert in the room.
That reframes things so much, because if you walk into a room feeling low status, you aren't permanently stuck there. You are literally just waiting for the topic to shift. And how does humor act as a lever for that status?
The data on this is striking. The research demonstrates that if you make just one successful joke in a group setting, just getting the room to genuinely laugh once, it dramatically increases the likelihood that people will subconsciously view you as a leader.
Just one joke.
Just one. Because levity signals confidence and emotional intelligence, which are high status markers.
But if you're listening right now and thinking about deploying a joke in your next staff meeting, we need to talk about the trap of self-deprecation. Because my instinct, when I feel a bit out of my depth, is to make a joke at my own expense to ease the tension.
The sources issue a massive warning about self-deprecating humor. It is highly situational. Self-deprecation is a flexibility that belongs almost exclusively to high-status individuals.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because if you are already the recognized expert or the CEO, pointing out a silly mistake you made humanizes you. It signals, I am so secure in my competence that I can mock my own flaws.
Ah, okay.
But if you are currently in a low-status position, maybe you are the junior employee or you are new to the group and you make a self-deprecating joke, the strategy massively backfires.
Because people just take you at your word. You are accidentally confirming incompetence.
Precisely. They might laugh, but subconsciously they register, they really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
You cement your low status.
That is so dangerous to get wrong. So if you are in a group dynamic and someone else is hoarding all the high status, we all know that person, the bulldozer who dominates the airspace, how do we use these tools to steer the room without coming across as aggressive?
You basically take on the role of a conversational steward. You direct the traffic, and you can do this using nonverbal cues, specifically the eye gaze technique.
The eye gaze technique.
Yeah. Human nature dictates that in a group, we almost always look at the person who's currently speaking, or the person we perceive to have the most authority. But if you want to shift the dynamic and distribute the status, you deliberately hold equitable eye contact with the quietest members of the group while the bulldozer is talking.
It's a very subtle shift. You are essentially physically rejecting the bulldozer's monopoly on attention.
Without saying a single word, your body language is signaling to the quiet person, I see you and you belong in this exchange. And then, when the bulldozer finally takes a breath...
Which they eventually have to do.
Exactly. You combine that eye gaze with the asking principle. You turn to the quiet person and say, I know you've dealt with a similar logistics issue before. I'd really value your perspective on this. You gracefully hijack the flow away from the dominator and grant status to someone else.
That is an absolute masterclass in reading the room. But what happens when the banter fails entirely? Because levity and eye gaze are great when everyone is operating in good faith. But if someone drops a passive-aggressive comment or gives you deeply unhelpful, unsolicited advice, levity isn't going to save you.
No, it won't.
And that leads us to the final and arguably most difficult pillar of the K, kindness.
We often diminish kindness as just a passive personality trait. We think of it as just being nice. But the researchers argue that in communication, kindness is an active, effortful, and sometimes exhausting battle against our own defensive instincts.
Especially with the people we see every single day.
Exactly. With a stranger, we maintain a polite facade. But with our partners, our siblings, our close colleagues, the familiarity breeds poor habits. The moment we feel criticized, our amygdala flares up, we get defensive, and we prepare for verbal combat.
Totally.
But the science of receptiveness offers a very concrete, operational recipe for de-escalating those moments.
So if a relative corners you and starts critiquing your career choices or your relationship, how do you prevent an explosion?
The first step is to acknowledge and affirm. Before you introduce any disagreement, you validate the reality. You say, I understand why you would be concerned about that, or it makes sense that you view it from that angle.
You're not saying they're right.
Exactly. You're not agreeing that they are right. You are affirming that their perspective exists. This instantly lowers their defensive shields.
And the sources were very specific about avoiding certain trigger words during this process, words they call dogmatic.
Yes, you must rigorously avoid words like because and therefore. When you tell someone, you are wrong because of these 3 facts, therefore we shouldn't do what you suggest, you sound incredibly self-righteous.
Like a lawyer giving a closing argument.
Right. It signals absolute certainty. And certainty makes the other person feel attacked and dismissed, which just escalates the conflict.
Instead of attacking their logic, there is this incredible technique from the research for handling unsolicited advice. It's called dividing yourself into parts.
Oh, I use this all the time now. It is remarkably effective for maintaining boundaries without burning bridges.
So, say you're getting that harsh career advice from a parent. It's coming from a place of love, but the impact is hurtful. You can divide your response into two distinct roles. You look at them and say, as your daughter, I know you love me and want me to be financially secure, but as the professional receiving this specific advice right now, I don't find it helpful.
It works so well because both statements are unequivocally true. You are validating their intent, which is usually to protect you or help you, while firmly rejecting the actual impact of their words.
It's brilliant.
You affirm the underlying relationship while dismissing the bad advice.
It allows you to protect your peace without going to war. All right, before we bring this all together, we have to address the ultimate awkward moment. We've prepped our topics, we've managed cognitive load by asking questions, we've injected levity, we've navigated conflict with kindness.
We're doing great.
But how on earth do we actually end the conversation and leave?
This might be the most reassuring piece of data in the entire course. Scientists have studied conversational endings extensively. They've analyzed thousands of interactions to find the optimal exit strategy. And their conclusion is, nobody knows how to do it perfectly.
The scientists literally gave up.
They did. They realized it is an unsolvable coordination problem. You cannot possibly know the exact moment I have exhausted my social battery, and I cannot know when you need to be somewhere else. The data shows that the vast majority of people walk away from a conversation feeling it was either slightly too long or slightly too short.
So if perfection is impossible, what is the best practice?
Embrace the awkwardness. Just stop trying to engineer a flawless fade-out. The best strategy is to be warm, direct, and decisive. Say, this has been wonderful, but I need to run. I'll catch up with you next week. And then just physically leave. Rip the Band-Aid off.
I love the permission to just be a little clumsy with it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have explored the mechanics of the talk framework. T for topics, override your ego and prime the pump by prepping ideas. A for asking, alleviate cognitive load by being endlessly interested, and ground the conversation to show your work. L for levity, combat boredom. Manage your dynamic status and thoughtfully steer the room. And K for kindness. Actively battle your defensiveness. Affirm before you disagree, and divide yourself into parts when setting boundaries.
If there's one overarching philosophy to absorb from all of this behavioral science, it is the concept of extending grace.
Grace for ourselves or for others?
Both, really. We hold ourselves to an impossible standard of perfect communication because we assume that since we've been talking since we were toddlers, we should be flawless at it. But if you really look under the hood at the cognitive load and the competing agendas, conversations are inherently messy.
They really are.
They are beautiful train wrecks, full of misread signals, awkward pauses, and clumsy interruptions. Perfection is not the goal of communication. Connection is. Give yourself grace when you stumble, and extend that same grace to others when they say the wrong thing.
That takes so much pressure off the whole endeavor. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to ponder. We have spent this entire time analyzing how to navigate the game of chicken with other people using the talk framework. But think for a moment about the relentless, never-ending conversation you are having with yourself in your own head every waking hour of the day.
The internal monologue is the most frequent conversation we ever have.
Exactly. What would happen if you actively applied the talk framework to yourself? What if you prepped better internal topics rather than defaulting to rehearsing your anxiety?
Wow.
What if you asked yourself genuinely curious questions about your reactions instead of judgmental ones? What if you added a little levity to your own silly mistakes and extended active, effortful kindness to yourself when you fail? How much higher would your own internal status be?
It's a profound shift.
Yeah.
We are often the worst perpetrators of being a ZQA0 questioner when it comes to our own mental state.
Next time you catch yourself spinning out, remember you're the one steering the car. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these tools, prime the pump, and go out and enjoy the beautifully messy train wreck of human connection. We'll catch you next time.